Hello and welcome. His mellow guitar sounds and vocals played a major part in influencing the jazz scene in America, and he topped the charts not only in jazz but rhythm and blues and pop. This week on One on One, meet the legendary guitarist and singer George Benson. As a young lad from a musical family in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he took an early interest in music, even playing a homemade guitar before moving on to finer instruments. George Benson was not only publicly performing early on, but was leading on an album by the age of 21. Over the years, the innovative jazzman has not only performed with top artists, but has also successfully played and recorded across genres, including pop and soul. To this day, the talented guitarist looks for new sounds to keep his music in the groove. George Benson, what a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine.
Now, you said once that you're driven by a desire to entertain. Is that what drives you still? Is that what keeps you going?
I think that's the most satisfactory part of what I do. I find myself doing things I didn't believe I would or could do when I'm in front of an audience. You know, I kind of stretch the envelope a little bit. But I find that people enjoy that and they remember it. And that's my whole thing, trying to get them to remember what I did on a certain day at a certain time.
Let's talk about your early childhood. You were born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, just before World War II started. What do you recall of that time?
A lot of noises in the sky, because I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and that's a steel city at the time. And so the skies were always red, you know, from the smoke coming out of the steel mills. And there was always a big thump in the air. About every minute or two, you get a thump, thump. You got used to that, you know. As I got older, it began to dissipate. The war was over, and they began to clean up. They had smoke control, and the skies were no longer red. So my life was changing, and I didn't really know it, you know. I had to get to know it. I remember those things, but I remember also that Pittsburgh was a very musical city. Great musicians used to come through there all the time on their way to New York. It was the last major stop before you got to the Pennsylvania Turnpike, a 300-mile shot straight to New York, which is only 65 miles after you got off the Turnpike. And so people say, well, that's it. I'm going straight to New York from here.
Was it a happy childhood?
I was very happy. I was very poor. My folks were poor. So we didn't have much weight except eating and sleeping. If we could accomplish that, we did well. Anytime we went beyond that, it was extra. My folks scuffled and worked hard to try to give me the basics, and they succeeded. I always felt like I was one of the neighborhood, you know. And when someone called me to do something extra to make a few extra bucks, I felt like a superstar.
Of course, America was a very different place at that time as well, especially for an African American. Do you recall racism being a big part of your life at that time? Was it something that impacted you?
Well, it always was. That didn't make us any different than any place else. But we did have a lot of ethnic people in our neighborhood. We had Irish, and we had Italian, and Jewish, and others, you know, in our neighborhood. So we had to deal with they were either foe or friends. We found out it was better to make friends than it was to fight all the time. So we did. I went to high school that was a vocational school, and I was in the minority. It was only out of 1,400 students, there were 30 African Americans. And so the first few years, you know, we fought like crazy. But I was always amazed at the fact that they never jumped on us and beat us up as a group. You know, if we did well in a particular battle, we survived. There was no recoil, anything like that. Matter of fact, it probably saved us for a while. Somebody said, oh, but don't mess with him. He's crazy, you know. But they never ganged on us. And when I took that into consideration, I said, well, maybe they don't really hate us. Maybe it's us. So I started changing my concept. You know, I started making friends with people. The biggest case I can think of, there was a guy, we had a terrible fight one time. And he thought about that all of his life, you know, until I saw him again after we left school. And he became a contractor to build houses. He was a home builder. And so I ran into him down in Florida. He was reluctant, but he had to come see his friend or his acquaintance from Pittsburgh, which was me, who had become successful out of the ghetto. And so he came backstage, and he thought I hated him because we had a fight. And I said, man, I consider you one of my friends, man. I don't hate you. You're my experience in life. And you know what? It drew us closer. Now, I would have never remembered your name if we had never had that confrontation. So you're my friend, man. I'm happy for your success.
Now, your mother was a singer, your father played many instruments, neither professionally, but they were obviously very musical. That presumably is what really pushed you towards music, yeah?
Sure. My mother hummed music all day. Even when she was eating, she would hum. Chicken. And that was from the time I was born. Because I remember looking up into her face and she was humming and singing. And so she took me to all these movies, and so I knew all the movie things. By the time I got to school, I probably knew all the standards that were famous on the radio and in the movies. And when they found that out in school, that I could sing, and I knew all these songs, they called me for everything. Let little Georgie Benson do it. Little Georgie, come up here and do it. You know, so my life actually was probably being planned long before I realized that music was going to be a major part of it.
And your father?
My father, my natural father never raised me. He was in World War II, and he was overseas when I was born, and he didn't know I was born until I was 2 years old. He didn't get home from the war till I was 4. It was my stepfather who taught me to play the ukulele and then the guitar later. But my natural father, being a musician who played several instruments, piano being one, drums and trombone, was a big jazz fan. And all of my life, after he came home from the Army, we started to become friends in my early teens. He would be on my back about the kind of music I was playing. He didn't particularly like all of that R&B stuff. So he said, man, why don't you play like Charlie Parker? I said, who? He said, man, play like Charlie, man. Charlie, he can play all in between the chord changes and play all of the beautiful stuff. So I finally found out who he was. And thanks to my dad who stayed on me, I began to put a little more emphasis on the quality of the music that I play. And before he died, before he passed away, he saw me record. He was there, present when I recorded the album Weekend in LA with the hit on Broadway. He was in the audience, and that was an incredible time in my life.
It's very touching, though, that your stepfather was the one who took an old wooden chest that you had in the house and cut it out and made a guitar with bits and pieces because you couldn't afford to buy a guitar from a shop.
Sure did. I kept crying about this guitar that I saw in a pawn shop window. And he finally said, all right, man, let's go take a look at it. And finally, my stepfather said, let's go around and take a peek at it, see what this is all about. They wanted $55, and that was like out of the question. So he looked at it from all sides, and he said, you know, I can probably make that. I didn't doubt it because he was a good carpenter. He was an all-around fix-it kind of guy. And so we went home, and I drew the guitar on a piece of paper, brown paper, and he traced it onto my mother's hoop chest, which she had blankets and pillowcases in it. Took the case off and traced it on there, and it took a whole day of breaking saws trying to, you know, carve that image that I created out of that hard piece of oak wood. You make one mistake, the wood cracks. So he took his time, and 24 hours later, we had the shape. And we bought $23 worth of parts, which was still strenuous for us. And we hooked it up, plugged it in, and put an amplifier, a little cheap amplifier we had around. Maybe it wasn't even an amplifier, maybe a radio of some kind. And bloom. And that night, I took the guitar to they had a record hop. My group, my singing group, was performing that. And I took the guitar out of a shopping bag, I didn't have no case. And the disc jockey, he said, what's that you got there? I said, it's a guitar. He said, what kind of guitar is that? I said, well, my father made this for me. And he stopped the whole dance, you know. Everybody was like, let's go do the hop, you know. The record went across. He destroyed the record with the needle. And he said, kids, I just want you to see something here. He said, this kid's father made him this guitar, and he held it up and made everybody see it, and they all applauded. And then I played the concert.
Tell me about the time you were like pretty much 7 years old when you did your first public appearance in a nightclub. You were singing, dancing, playing music. You were pretty good all round.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. But I shouldn't have been in the nightclub. I was only 7 years old, and this was an after-hour place. They didn't open up until after midnight. And I remember him trying to convince my mother to let me play the place. And she said, absolutely not. He's only 7 years old and he's got to go to school. And he said, well, no, if he performs on Fridays and Saturdays, there's no school the next day. And he offered her more money than she could, an offer she couldn't refuse. So we ended up working in that nightclub. I was doing my little, dance jingle and had my guitar and singing and carrying on. And people was throwing money up on the stage, And there was a lot of money in those times, And then one day, the police came in with their hatchets and sledgehammers and chopped that whole place up and took everybody to jail, including me. We got out of it, but we had a lot of answering to do. And that was quite a trying time of my life. My mother was, from that point on, she was skeptical of everything. She never let me get involved to any great degree.
How are you with your own family in terms of encouraging them to do music, for example? Of course, they've got the pedigree. In terms of like the freedoms you give them to experiment too.
Well, I love my boys. I had 7 boys. They started getting into music, and I found out that I couldn't force them to think any particular way. So I let them find their own way through, and then I tried to support what they were interested in, But it wasn't like it was in my case where I had to make a living at it, or else I couldn't spend that much time at it, They never had to go at it with that degree. I sent one of them to music school, another one studied classical piano, another one became his own street musician. He played drums, bass, piano, guitar, the whole trip. And they seem to be very, very happy at the way they're doing things. So I leave them alone, I let them have their lives.
George Benson, many more questions for you. We're going to stop here for a short break. Back with more with George Benson in a moment.